They are, let's face it, the superhumans. Their gym-toned bodies the opposite of the junk food couch potato culture behind our obesity crisis. But is the government's decision to launch its plans on the back of their success inspirational or just plain cynical? Some health campaigners are stunned by the timing, with both Parliament and the Prime Minister still off for the summer.
This is a gimmick, tying it with the Olympics, when actually what is needed is serious, robust measures tackling food and nutrition in our diets, not just fitness and exercise.
So have the plans been watered down? It's understood there will be no ban on junk food at supermarket checkouts, no ban on adverts for unhealthy foods during family television shows like The X Factor, and while manufacturers will be given reformulation targets of 20% less sugar, they'll only be voluntary. But half an hour of daily exercise at school will be included and monitored by Ofsted. And more of this is much needed in a country where 1 in 5 children are obese by the time they leave primary school.
Just oozing with gooey cheese and smoky bacon.
But is it enough to counter the might of the food industry? Without restrictions on how this stuff's promoted, it's not the public health revolution campaigners wanted for the next generation.
I think it's far from robust. I think there's so much more that we could do. I think we need to make large organisations think twice about what they're promoting for our children in terms of their diet and in terms of what they're drinking. And I think we need to hold them to account.
Is it okay if I check your blood pressure, Mary?
Absolutely.
Because it's the cash-strapped NHS that's shouldering the burden, spending £5 billion a year on obesity-related conditions like type 2 diabetes, conditions that ruin lives.
Diabetes is associated with a number of serious complications, obviously heart disease, but it can affect the kidneys, it can affect the eyes. All of these complications could be avoided if patients looked at their weight and managed it and kept it down as much as possible.
The last government promised a game-changing strategy, and frankly that's what's needed, because unlike our Olympians in the field of child obesity, we're still languishing at the bottom of the Western European League.
And Rachel joins me now. Rachel, we've talked about this before. This was such a big deal for David Cameron. He talked about it very often, and yet here it is being launched while the Prime Minister's away in the middle of the summer. Is this essentially going to be a case of a good day to bury bad news, do you think?
Well, it is odd timing, isn't it? We are in the middle of the summer recess. The Prime Minister's not here, Parliament aren't here. And as you say, for the last government, this was a large plank of their thinking, wasn't it? David Cameron, yes, but also George Osborne had a personal commitment to this. It had high profile, largely because of Jamie Oliver's involvement. And yet I understand that tomorrow there won't even be a grand policy launch. I think it will be Jane Ellison, one of the Treasury ministers, who I think we can say fairly is relatively unknown, who will be doing the rounds of radio interviews.
You may have a point, yeah.
And you have to wonder, don't you, particularly in these post-Brexit times and the economic uncertainty that we have, whether they had the appetite to go after the major food manufacturers. And remember, that's what Public Health England recommended in its report to the government. That's what it wanted. It doesn't seem that those measures are there. And given that, you have to ask yourself whether for a government which is overladen, if you like, with the jobs it's got in front of it, just wanted to brush this one off the to-do list while we were all looking the other way at the Olympics.
OK, but the politics is one thing. The economics is another. This, as I understand it, at least reducing obesity and being seen to reduce obesity was a key part, was it not, of the NHS's budgeting going forward?
Yeah, and that's the sobering thing about this, where it comes away from politics and playing at that and becomes a real issue for the country. Because, as you say, Simon Stevens, the head of the NHS, made it very clear in his 5-year forward plan for the NHS that the only way there was any chance of balancing the books, making the kind of savings the Treasury had demanded, was if there was a real tackling of the childhood obesity problem in particular. Now, what's interesting is that sources close to him this morning seem to know nothing about this launch. And given that in the past they had such a close relationship with the Treasury, that really did beg a belief. And I think it raises real questions now, because public health budgets are being cut for local authorities. And unless the soft drinks levy, which we'll hear more about tomorrow, expecting legislation now in 2017, really delivers some serious sums, it's difficult to see how the NHS is going to cut that £5 billion a year it spends on anti-obesity measures.